Thank you so much for joining this conversation about peace, nonviolence, and curriculum in the post-secular Catholic school. Even though this is an asynchronous activity, you will be able to share your comments by pausing the video, opening your phone's camera, scanning the QR code, and clicking on the link. Please do it now to practice and share your role, school, and location. Also, at the end of this presentation, you will find the link to request a transcript of this session, and I hope this will facilitate your experience and give you easy access to references that I will use and quote. My name is Heidi Massey. As a researcher from a state university, my perspectives come from the education field of curriculum studies, specifically international curriculum and peace education. As a Catholic in education, my review draws upon official documents of the Church. In this session, we will review the notions of peace and nonviolence in Catholic education, their connection with different approaches to the curriculum in faith-based education, and explore the precepts of post-secularism, primarily in the perspective of Pope Benedict XVI and Jürgen Habermas, as an essential framework for the pedagogical understanding of some of the most recent educational invitations presented by the Holy See to Catholic schools worldwide. Pope Benedict XVI in 2006 emphasized that tradition is not the transmission of things or words, a collection of dead things. Tradition is the permanent presence of the Savior in our communities, the permanent actualization of the original communion. He explained that tradition is the living river that links us to the origins, the living river in which the origins are ever present. This river, he says, irrigates various lands, feeds various geographical places, germinating the best of that land, the best of that culture. In this sense, the Pope later on also affirmed, the God who reveals himself is always the same, but our understanding of him and of how to relate to him evolves. In a similar sense, we could see the Catholic curriculum as a dynamic expression of this living river of tradition, in which diverse pedagogical approaches and educational cultures emerge thanks to a shared and common source, the living water of the true teacher. In this framework, we will review peace and nonviolence as the essence, rather than an instrumental part of the mission and identity of Catholic education. I hope this space could become an opportunity to explore the role that Catholic education could have in today's society, a sociocultural ground in which the Church not only acts on behalf of peace, but mainly and most importantly becomes a sacrament of peace, to use the word of the German bishops in 2000. My initial interest in post-secular perspectives was inspired by an informal encounter with an elementary school teacher and her group of students during their visit to the Catholic Charities location where I used to work as director of education right before jumping into the world of the academia. Our first stop was the chapel. It was an opportunity to give a spiritual meaning to their experience, and something that all Catholic schools appreciated. I asked the teacher if she wanted to make any comments before moving to our next stop. With an unusual tension, she got close to me and said, "I know my role and mission. I am their teacher, and I am careful about not proselytizing. So no, I will not make any spiritual remarks." Even though, to be honest, our request was general, not necessarily related to spirituality. After this unexpected reaction that the students were able to hear, a mother in the group broke the silence, saying to the kids, "These buildings are a beautiful example of unity. All the parishes raised funds together to build this place, and now we can help hundreds of people each day." I became intrigued by the teacher's strong boundaries about her role as a teacher in a Catholic school and her struggles to differentiate between giving a spiritual meaning to an experience and religious education, between offering a pause for contemplation and reflection versus proselytizing or indoctrinating. I wondered if this was an exception to the rule or an example of a recurrent issue. So here we have the first question. The compartmentalization of spirituality as a subject content of religious education became a common practice in many schools. Some leaders see this as a beneficial and necessary practice to ensure theological accuracy, but others perceive it as problematic. How do you perceive it? What relationship does your school establish between spiritual formation and religious education? Between spiritual formation and academic knowledge? Please take a moment to make a pause, scan the QR code, and share your comments with us. I hope you pause to reflect and share your comments. Before we move to our next reflection, it would be good to stop and ask ourselves, were those questions about curriculum? Piner and Grument, renowned scholars in the field, argue that curriculum studies, rather than discussions about subject content, study plans, objectives, or instructional design, are instead complicated conversations, intentional pauses that seek to restore the contemplative moment in which we interrupt our taken for granted understanding of our work and ask the basic questions practical activity silences. One of the primary missions of this broader sense of curriculum is the prevention of dehumanization, the rescue of subjectivity, and the protection of relationality in a world dominated by instrumental rationality. These common concerns are relatable to public and private schools alike. In this broader notion of curriculum, we transcend the limits of the school and embrace the community, understanding that a community does not dissolve autonomy and subjectivity, but rather values it all the more, because the relation between individual and community is a relation between one totality and another. An interaction where, as Catholic educator Chiara Lubeck points out, we continuously explore the way we are forming the person in relationship, which for us means the human person in the image of the Trinity, one who is capable of continually transcending the self through a spiritual and educational practice of mutual love. In this context, our conversation about peace, nonviolence, and curriculum will not and cannot be centered on specific methods, but in a broader sense of education, specifically faith-based schooling in society, to finally return to its implications in our daily work. In Spirituality and Knowing, Hopner explains that in the infiltration of positivist approaches in education, questions about meaning and significance of life gave way to technical questions of control and behavior, and some important aspects of moral and spiritual formation barely survived as components of democratic cultures, as subjects of an ethics class. In this transition, additional challenges emerged, in which Sands argues problem questions replaced meaning questions, and Habermas affirms that the necessary separation between state and religion led to the misunderstanding that separated the public sphere and spirituality in oversimplified notions of secularity. This challenge inspired the conversations about post-secularism between Jürgen Habermas and Pope Benedict XVI, then compiled in the book The Dialectics of Secularization on Reason and Religion, and subsequent dialogues between Habermas and Catholic theologians compiled in the book An Awareness of What is Missing, Faith and Reason in the Post-Secular Age. Habermas argues that in the tension between faith and knowledge, the secular society gave to religious convictions the epistemological status of irrational, and imposed a tolerance that was not equally distributed on the shoulders of believers and unbelievers alike. Since while some citizens had to deny part of themselves to act as citizens of the state, to participate in the public sphere, others did not. In this illusion of a passive coexistence, he says, based on avoidance rather than dialogue and peaceful encounters, the original intentions of secularity got lost, taking us into a spiral where secularization of a state was confused with secularization of society, and secularization was reduced to the relation of the state and religion, whereas, as Taylor would say, in fact, It has to do with the correct response of the democratic state to diversity. Habermas and Ratzinger's discussions of post-secularity did not question the separation between religion and state, but differentiated from the role of spirituality in the public sphere. This call of attention aimed to re-examine the relation between modern reason and contemporary religious consciousness. It challenges the oversimplification of religion as a fundamentalist narrative, explores the consequences of the secular illusion of apparent neutrality, and proposes educating for the pursuit of reciprocal relationships of constructive coexistence between believers and non-believers. One in which believers commit to translate the religious message into a language and approach that could be understood by others in the public sphere, in which they commit to intentionally interact with other religious communities and non-religious communities, while non-believers make an effort to respect and recognize the contribution of religious groups and the role they play in the public sphere. In its premises, post-secularity became a new opportunity to explore the previous perception of the curriculum in faith-based education, review the role spirituality could play in the private and public sphere, prevent dangerous and confusing moral fragmentations, and support a way of interaction that makes the Trinitarian essence of the person in relationship a fundamental educational premise that takes us a step closer to the role of peace and nonviolence in Catholic education. But what are the other traditional perceptions of the curriculum of institutionalized faith-based education? And what makes the post-secular approach not only different, but relevant? At this point, it is fundamental to recognize the different perspectives of curriculum and faith-based education in our educational communities. We must not see those categories in inflexible, linear, historical, chronological ways, but rather as paradigms that many times coexist also in the Catholic Church, even within the same educational institutions. A challenge that sometimes might lead to fruitful curriculum conversations or constant and tense disagreements among staff. Exploring Patrick Slattery's categorization of the curriculum in pre-modern, secular, and postmodern perspectives will be a helpful exercise to begin this journey. Hopefully, this also would help us understand the potential causes of resistance or support in our schools to some educational initiatives related, for example, to the Global Compact on Education or Laudato Si, and the reasons why the post-secular perspective might offer a valuable alternative for reconciliation and clarification. Slattery differentiates pre-modern perceptions or theology as curriculum text, modern views of curriculum or curriculum as technological text, and postmodern perspectives of curriculum as theological. In the following table, you could see some of the main descriptors of each perception. For example, one is mainly denominational, autocratic, and dependent. Other is secular, individualistic, and independent. And the third one is primarily ecumenical, communitarian, and interdependent. Slattery affirms that one of the most substantial criticisms against the pre-modern perspectives of theology as curriculum text and the secular perspectives of curriculum as a technological text is that both neglected the nurturing of cultural inclusivity and interreligious dialogue. On the other side, we could say the main challenge of curriculum as theological is that its postmodern connotations connects us with a relativist ontology which rejects the existence of any possible correct reality, a relativism that the Catholic Church strongly opposes. But in addition to this risk of moving into radical relativism, there is also an additional concern about the perpetuation of instrumentality. In this sense, Piner affirms that modernity and its apparent postmodernity flatter the temporal structure of the present as they install calculation, not contemplation, as the primary means of reason. However, it would be a mistake to precipitate a rejection of curriculum as theological and reject many of the valuable elements that might be compatible with the effort of Catholic education, or even worse, to reduce those concepts into those inflexible categories and rigid divisions that might lead to ignoring valuable, compatible, and necessary elements. The post-secular approach rescues the value of cultural inclusivity, interreligious dialogue, ecumenism, interdependence, community, ecology, spirituality, inquiry, and proleptic hope, all mentioned by Slattery, in which we commit to protect also dogma and tradition. But we are also careful about not reducing Catholic education into one rigid category, or getting into the temptation of compromising the challenge of a relational peace by going into the moral fragmentation of the curriculum as technological, in which the hopes for relational love and peace are reduced to the private sphere. In this sense, the post-secular is also closely connected with academic efforts on the internationalization of the curriculum, in which forming for solidarity across difference and nonviolent conflict, to use the words of one, we could also get to the point of loving one another across difference. So at this point, I would like to ask you, could you identify some of those perspectives proposed by Slattery in the views and practices of staff, departments, or schools in your diocese? Is there a dominant perspective in your practice? How can each paradigm influence our understanding of peace? Please take a second to scan the QR code and share your comments with us. Ratzinger and Habermas' perspectives of the post-secular society and therefore a post-secular curriculum might offer a space for reconciliation compatible with the understanding of peace, nonviolence, and education in the Catholic Church. In the post-secular dialogue, for example, the invitations of St. John Paul II is supported. In this curriculum, Catholic schools are encouraged to create a culture of encounter in which people speak with one another instead of merely about one another. A perspective where interreligious and ecumenical encounters are a fundamental part of formation, but also where there is a clear understanding of the difference between dialogues of life and proclamation, between formation for debate and formation for dialogue, between collaboration and relativism, in which preparing for dialogue implies exploring the way we relate to God through the way we relate to our brothers and sisters, regardless if they are believers or non-believers. In this framework, peace is relational, not because of a theoretical conversion process to a new curriculum paradigm, but as the result of a pedagogical metanoia. If He is our peace, this perspective is illuminated in a striking way by the relationship between the persons of the Trinity within the one divine substance. The Trinity is absolute unity insofar as the three divine persons are pure relationality. In this sense, we make our relationship with our brothers and sisters and with the world a manifest of peace, not because it is the way to achieve it, but it is the way to be aware of its relational presence in our reciprocal relationships of love. This is the underlying essence that we could find if we see through the proper lens documents such as the Fratelli Tutti or initiatives like the Global Compact on Education, which became a priority for the International Office of Catholic Education, that in fact dedicated its 2022 International Congress to this theme, or the World Union of Catholic Teachers. among many others. In the opening of the Peace and Citizenship chapter at the Pontifical Lateran University, Pope Francis stated that, faced with the lack of peace, it is not enough to invoke freedom from war, proclaiming rights, or even use an authority in its various forms. Above all, it is necessary to question ourselves, to recover the capacity to be among people, to dialogue with them and understand their needs, even with our weakness, to convey not only a message of peace, but also peace as a message. From curriculum perspectives, this approach also exalts essential elements of nonviolence explored by one: personal transformation as the basis for social transformation, interconnectedness, relational dynamics, fellowship, receptiveness as a precondition for compassion, and recognition that the path to nonviolence usually begins as an internal journey that eventually will manifest in the intention to create a more loving society. If we are finding resistance to this invitation to relation, dialogue, coexistence, and interconnectedness, and peace in our institutions under a wide array of excuses, we must wonder if the reasons behind our teachers' and administrators' decisions are purely theological or influenced by cultural and social factors that we must indeed overcome as communities. As the German bishops affirmed, the Church must resist the temptation and any attempt to let the gospel be politically instrumentalized. But as a sacrament of peace, the Church must also protect, as Oluwatosin reminds us, the personal and communitarian dimensions expressed in the Greek words used for peace in the Bible: shalom and irene. Shalom, which he states is historically associated with the wholeness of life, fulfillment, harmonious relationship with God and others, and the absence of war. And irene, which represents restoration, reconciliation, and serenity. An explicit reaction against the secular and positivist attempts to relegate the role of religious communities to the private sphere was made in the encyclical Pacem in Terris, or Peace on Earth, in which the Pope made universal peace and human dignity the center of Catholic social teaching. This document also opened a new path to inclusiveness in a spiritual, educational, and social perspective. His invitation to work in fruitful collaboration with all people of goodwill, not only Catholic communities, was also reaffirmed by Pope Benedict XVI in 2009, when he argued that fruitful collaboration between faith and reason cannot but render the work of charity more effective within society, and it constitutes the most appropriate framework for promoting fraternal collaboration between believers and non-believers in their shared commitment to working for justice and the peace of the human family. Pacem in Terris already introduced an invitation closely related to some principles of post-secularism. In 1968, Pope Paul VI gave relevance to these precepts by establishing the Catholic World Day of Peace, which makes an important remark to the need of bringing spirituality into the public sphere, not to debate, but to dialogue, and participate in a fraternal collaboration beyond the boundaries of the Catholic Church, in the pursuit of the common good and the hope of universal peace. The approach to spiritual and religion formation in Catholic schools in North America also had significant transformations in the mid-60s. Briquerol stated that before 1965, religious education in U.S. Catholic high schools had a dominant normative prescriptive approach centered on historical narratives, rigid teaching based on recitation and memorization. Following the publication of Pacem in Terris, the Catholic Church emphasized the importance of balancing the nurturing of the individual relationship with God with the expression of spirituality in human relationships and commitment to social justice, an initiative that seemed to promote a transition from more radical moralistic discourses to radical solidarity and effective relationality, to use the word of Nonviolence. Brick et al. Argued that already in the 60s, some Catholic schools in the US moved to this new approach of spirituality, which encouraged students to examine and reflect on their lives in relation to the world, Christians' relationships to themselves, other people, and God, and personal responsibility for making moral decisions. But paradoxically, the United States also experienced the surge of an intense debate that has drawn a line even today between communities that consider this shift a deviation or those who consider it an authentic spiritual expression of Trinitarian love. Perspectives that require, using the words of Benedict XVI, a deeper critical evaluation of the category of relation. Habermas argues that this debate seems to reflect also the struggles of some Catholic communities to understand the secular thinking of humanism, the Enlightenment, and political liberalism, as well as the impact of the cultural historical influence of American Puritanism and Christian fundamentalism in local practices of Catholicism. In the encyclical letter Divini Illis Magistri, Pope Pius XI expressed his concerns about the risk of shifting Catholic educational priorities and perspectives toward positivism. Protecting the formation of the heart as a critical factor of Catholic schools was reaffirmed in Gravissime Educationes by Pope Paul VI, in which he affirms that Christian students are called to contribute to the good of the whole society by bearing witness in hope and action, strengthened by an education model rooted in the imitation of Christ. In that sense, the German bishops affirm that Jesus saw himself as a messenger of peace, and his glad tidings bring us an ethos of nonviolence, of love for one's enemies, and willingness for reconciliation. Thus, nonviolence must not be perceived as a new initiative or subject matter to be considered by a Catholic school. Instead, it is an ontological and theological return to a Catholic education rooted in the ethos of its true teacher. Pope Francis dedicated his message to the World Day of Peace to the Christian understanding of nonviolence. This reflection explains that Jesus himself lived in violent times, yet he taught that the true battlefield where violence and peace meet is the human heart. He taught his disciples to love their enemies and to turn the other cheek. When he stopped her accusers from stoning the woman caught in adultery, and when on the night before he died he told Peter to put away his sword, Jesus marked out the path of nonviolence. He walked the path to the very end, to the cross, whereby he became our peace and put an end to hostility. Catholic organizations such as Pax Christi International responded to this invite by promoting international conversations with representatives of 49 countries to discuss perspectives on nonviolence in Catholic education. They also created open sources for sharing peace and nonviolent experiences and projects, offered professional development for Catholic teachers to assist in the integration of principles of nonviolence in different school subjects, reviewing perspectives on war and peace in their textbooks, school culture, and personal approaches. Other projects, such as the International Catholic Peacebuilding Network, created worldwide opportunities for the study of Catholic peacebuilding in a model of voluntary participation of scholars, practitioners, religious, and lay members. In addition, this network also created international educational initiatives in higher education for peace studies and global studies worldwide. These projects became world-leading interdisciplinary research centers where religious and non-religious could participate. In the Global Compact of Education, Pope Francis and the Congregation for Catholic Education extended an international invitation to review the approach to dialogue, interdependence, inclusion, relation, peace, and human dignity. Hopeful that in this shared experience, Catholic communities, schools, and universities could embark on a process of change, inspired by the culture of care, fraternity, and peace. In the invitation of curriculum studies to respond to the question, what knowledge is of most worth? This presentation becomes an invitation to pause and think. If blessed are the peacemakers, where can we start? Is it preparing our students to establish dialogues of life with people from other convictions to encourage solidarity across difference? Is it helping them understand the difference between violence and conflict? Is it creating opportunities for dialogue and collaboration with students in schools of different religions and denominations? Is it exploring the difference between fraternity and solidarity? Or reconstructing the way we integrate spirituality across our practice, or the way we challenge the staff to review their perceptions about spirituality in the curriculum? At this point, my invitation is for you to become the promoter of these complicated conversations in your school and share, if you want, which questions would you ask. Reframing the role of spirituality in the public sphere and taking intentional steps towards a new communitarian relationship between believers and unbelievers, the formation towards dialogue and solidarity across difference, is a goal and an initiative that probably would need to take its first steps in private education. Embracing post-secularity in the Catholic school could then be a transformative process not only for private but public education, one that can begin with little steps. Considering the Catholic school system is an international system with more than 50 million enrolled students, a little step could have great repercussions. So I invite you to consider this challenge of incorporating across your learning interactions this approach to relational peace and post-secularity. Back in 1963, Chiara Lubeck, the Italian Catholic school teacher who received the UNESCO Prize of Peace Education in 1996, invited us to always keep our hearts open to something that can certainly help us in the process of forming for peace. In her reminder, Chiara invited us to pay close attention to the divine alchemy of transforming suffering into love, also expressed in the mystery of Jesus forsaken on the cross, which contains the expression of all loves. Let's entrust this journey to Him, the Prince of Peace. Please scan the QR code if you would like to send me an email with your comments, questions, or transcript requests. Thank you so much for listening.